if you are interested in uh, using the closed captioning, that is at the bottom of your screen, and you can enable that and see the captions live. Is there anything that I'm forgetting, Crystal or anyone else?
What if people do have questions, Parker?
What if people do have questions? Keep them to yourself. No. If folks do have questions, the way we'll be doing this is, so we're going to start off with an introduction to the topic. And I have a slide for that to no one's surprise. Then we're going to meet our panelists. Then we are going to ask some questions that we have predetermined questions. And then at the end, we will have time for audience questions. But once again, we are centering the voices of people of color in those questions. This is a topic about how people of color process and deal with white supremacy in their daily lives. So if you are a white identifying individual, you are welcome to be here, but you're like a fly on the wall. You're just listening, all right? Thank you for that question, Crystal. Okay, so let me kind of dive into our topic today. We are going to be discussing internalized white supremacy and what that looks like. I wanted to start off with, though, talking about a framework that I often use to address internalized oppression. And who am I, you might ask, because I didn't introduce myself. My name is Parker, and I am the co-founder of Inclusive Guide, and I'm very excited to be here today. You'll meet the rest of our panelists soon. So, when we think about how ideas get brought to the forefront, when we think about how our systems that we're living in get created, right? We have to address the bias that is at the center and development of any of these things. And so I want to talk about a little bit about how bias gets laddered up into systems of oppression that then affect the people that live within and operate within those systems. So I'm going to start off, I'm going to share my screen really quickly. Right. And I'm going to give kind of a silly example, right? We're talking about white supremacy, but I want to talk about peanut butter, right? So I am a crunchy peanut butter fan. I love crunchy peanut butter. If I have the opportunity to choose crunchy over creamy, I will choose crunchy peanut butter every time. That's my bias, and that's a conscious bias that I know about, right? But let's say my good friend here on the call with me, Tony, invites me out for dinner. And I know that Tony is a creamy peanut butter eater. And I don't, like, I go with my gut reaction and I reject Tony's invitation to dinner, right? And I might say, oh, that's just my gut, I don't know, right? But subconsciously, unconsciously, I am thinking, Tony is a creamy peanut butter eater and he is not going to feed me what I need. Like, he doesn't have good taste in food because he likes creamy peanut butter. I just think that we are not going to jive together. And so I am choosing, my gut reaction is to not go out with him because of this bias that I have, right? That is a prejudice. Like, I am now interacting with people differently because of my perception of them. If I then decide that as a crunchy peanut butter eater, that I actually don't like, I just want to hang out with crunchy peanut butter eaters like myself. Like I'm going to hang out with them. I have a job. I have a business that I own, and I put a sign on my door that says no creamies allowed. I'm not going to serve creamy peanut butter eaters. I only hang out with crunchy peanut butter eaters. I bought a house, just recently bought a house. I made sure the neighborhood was predominantly a crunchy peanut butter eating neighborhood, right? My kids are not allowed to play with creamy peanut butter eaters. As a matter of fact, I have it in my will that if they marry a creamy peanut butter eater, they're going to lose their inheritance, right? This is now discrimination. I am discriminating against creamy peanut butter eaters based on my bias of liking creamy peanut butter. Then, like, anybody can treat anybody this way, right? But then we get a line of power. And the line of power is where this bias, this ideology gets solidified. So if I then know that there is enough crunchy peanut butter eaters, either public or secret crunchy peanut butter eaters, that I can get a law put on the ballot, right? Saying that creamy peanut butter is illegal in my state, right? And I get it put on the ballot and enough people vote for it, and that it is now a law. And you can't have creamy peanut butter in the state of Colorado, right? I've now created this system of oppression that affects everyone, whether or not they have the same belief system or the same ideology as me. And think about it like a couple of generations down, right? We have this law. Everybody now is like, oh, well, you know, creamy peanut butter must be bad because it's against the law. We've developed like names that we call one another. We call, if someone is lazy or shiftless or whatever, we call them creamies, right? We've got this lexicon, and people who are crunchy peanut butter eaters believe that they are right because the system backs them up, right? And they are reflected in the system. And people who are creamy peanut butter eaters start to, they doubt themselves. The system does not reflect them. They start to feel like, okay, I must be a bad person because I like creamy peanut butter. It's a part of the law that all I see is representation of crunchy peanut butter people, right? And something must be wrong about me to be a creamy peanut butter lover, all right? Now, that's a really silly example to talk about a really serious thing, right? When we think about the four eyes of oppression, all oppression starts out with an ideology, right? And that could be like heteronormative, could be the ideology that, you know, all relationships should be between opposite genders, and if you are outside of that, then you are abnormal, right? And then that ideology gets institutionalized by like laws that say it's illegal to marry someone of the same sex, and we have policies on who can you know, give benefits to their spouses if they can only do that if they are the opposite gender, not the same gender. Then we uphold those things interpersonally by saying, you know, we reinforce it. We have microaggressions around those ideologies where we reinforce that one group is subordinate to another. And then the last part of it is internalized oppression. And that internalized oppression is when the oppressed group then pulls that into themselves and say, well, that must be the way, right? That must be right, because that's what I'm seeing represented in popular culture. And we're here today to talk about that final I, the internalized, And we're going to be talking specifically about internalized white supremacy, because we have a system in our, we're here in the US and we're going to speak to US culture, but we have a system that was created around whiteness as the default. And that system is reflected in a lot of different things. Like myself growing up, my crayon box had a flesh colored crayon, and that crayon was not my color. That crayon was the color of white skin, right? Band-aids, you could only buy that one color, fuzzy peach color Band-aid, right? Because that was a representation of white skin color, right? I think about as a kid growing up, when I thought about beauty, right? When I thought about supermodels, I thought about folks like Cindy Crawford, right? Tall, leggy, blonde, Pamela Anderson, right? Those were my representation of beauty within our society. And I got fed those messages every day that whiteness was the best, that whiteness was superior, right? And that if I wanted to be good as a person, that I needed to do that. I needed to increase my proximity to whiteness, right? So like I needed to straighten my hair, that the way my hair came out of my head was unkept, was not great. So I needed to straighten my hair so that it resembled white people's hair. I needed to dress a certain way, talk a certain way. And so we want to talk about the ways that those messages not only get internalized, right? You internalize this ideology of inferiority, but also the ways that we sometimes, without even knowing it, because it's so built into us as people of color, uphold those messages. And how do we divest from that? How do we understand and come to ourselves with an understanding that the way that we are, the way that we show up as people is valid and is needed and is important, and that we can remove ourselves or divest ourselves from that white supremacist thinking. So that's the setup for our conversation today with this lovely panel. And we're going to go around and let the panel introduce themselves so we can begin this conversation. So I'll start, and then I'll call maybe on panel member, or we'll just pass it like we did before. So my name is Parker. My pronouns are she, they. I'm coming to you from the traditional and ancestral homelands of the Cheyenne, Arapaho, and Ute nations, current homelands too, here in Denver, Colorado. And I'm gonna pass it to Crystal.
Hello, everyone. I'm Crystal Egley, the other co-founder of the Inclusive Guide, along with Parker, and my pronouns are she, her, also here in the ancestral and contemporary homelands of Arapaho and Cheyenne in Denver, Colorado. I'm going to pass it to Tony, who is next on my screen.
Hi, I'm Tony Neighbors, he, him pronouns. I'm the founder and principal consultant of Tony Neighbors Consulting, where I bring racial equity strategies to businesses, organizations, governments, etc. I am coming from the lands of the Coast Salish and the Tulalip, living about an hour north of Seattle in Washington State. I will pass it over to Rosie.
Hi, y'all. My name is Rosie Sanchez, she, her, ella, and I am calling in from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded and currently occupied lands of the Ute, Arapaho, Cheyenne, Sioux, and 48 other tribes in Colorado, specifically Wheat Ridge. And I am the co-chairwoman of the Next 100 Colorado. I will pass it along to my colleague, Chris.
Hi, everyone. My name is Chris Talbot Heindel. My pronouns are they, them. I'm also in Denver on the traditional and current lands of the Ute, Arapaho, and Cheyenne peoples. And I'm also a member of Next 100 Colorado.
Thank you so much, everyone, for being here today. We really appreciate you coming in and sharing your voice in this important discussion. And so the first question that I want to start off with, and these questions are just kind of to guide us, but we might go wherever it feels good, right? So the first question is about racist situations that we have witnessed or been a part of in a social or work environment. And if we can remember like our thoughts in that moment, right, of that situation. And I'll start off. I worked pretty high up in an organization. I was very excited to have my first like executive leadership position. And I remember we were in a meeting and we were talking about an upcoming event. And the marketing person, who was a marketing vice president, who was a white woman, was talking about how they were going to drum up business for this event. And they said, don't worry, we're going to pimp y'all out this weekend. We're going to pimp y'all out. We're going to be so busy. We all going to be working it. And the whole room got quiet. Everyone stopped and stared at me. And I had been on the job like 2 weeks, and I just kind of like looked around, and I didn't really say anything. And then she tried to redeem herself by saying, no, I'm not like I mean, I'm gonna pimp y'all out like Snoop Dogg, like that, pimp you out like Snoop Dogg. And the room got even quieter, and everyone continued to stare at me. And I was just like, we're gonna be working hard, I guess. Totally laughed, totally went along with the joke. And that's not even, what I look back on with the most regret. But the next day, that person came to my office to apologize. They'd gotten a hold of themselves, but the apology ended. They just cried on me for about an hour. They came to my office. I couldn't leave. They cried on me. I'm not racist. Please accept my apology. And I, in that point, assured them that I knew that they were not racist, and that what they said, of course, I accepted it as a joke, and that it was okay. It's okay, white lady. I know you feel really bad, right? And I did that for like an hour. I didn't correct them. I didn't try and teach them. Instead, I went along with it because I was new in the position. I had a fear for myself, my own position, right? And I just wanted it to be over. I wanted them to leave my space. So there. Who would like to go next, if anyone?
Yeah, I guess I can jump in here really quick, and thank you for sharing that with us, Parker. Mine is a little bit, it's personal, because, and it just came to my mind when you were speaking, Parker. My best friend's wife and I were having a conversation about her half brother's mother and how she's a Latino woman. And she made a comment about how they had an interaction that wasn't really going really well. And her comment was, oh, I just brushed it off because she's Latina, loud and emotional. And I didn't realize in that moment that I was excusing her behavior, because I too identify as like loud and emotional, but not because I'm Latina, but because I'm human. And in that moment, I didn't necessarily know how to respond. I just kind of shook my head and was just like, this can't be happening. Surely she doesn't mean what she's saying. And I gave that white woman the benefit of the doubt of she doesn't know what she's saying, right? Without not trusting myself and trusting somebody outside of myself to be a better person. And that's how I reacted. And that was years ago. I now know better. But initially, that's I would give them the benefit of the doubt. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing, Rosie. Chris, I saw you unmuted.
Yes, so I have one that's kind of still raw. It was a couple years ago, but it still feels new. I was sitting in a board meeting and taking notes because that was my duty in this board meeting as the only person of color, queer person, or trans person in the room. I was the note taker. So I was taking notes and the question came up about adding diversity to the board because the board was pretty homogenous. And one board member just like piped in and said, well, they have to have actual qualifications. They can't just bring their skin color. That can't be all they bring. They have to have these other qualifications. And I remember being like horrified, angry, and terribly upset because it's like, is that what this board member thinks of me sitting here? Like that I have nothing that I'm bringing other than my identities. And why would they assume that that's the only thing a person of color could bring? And like, I was so angry that I couldn't react. I was honestly shaking and I was not actually taking notes at the moment because I couldn't control like my fingers at all. Thankfully, another board member called that person out on their behavior and I made sure to add it to the minutes once I was able to type again.
You know, the ways that we react in those situations, I think is important and says a lot about how systems have in some ways taken our voices, right? We are in these spaces, we want, like I feel like I've had a couple of different places in my development where I started out not knowing, right? I started out really, when I was young, I was buying into the white supremacy delusion, right? When I got told by the groups that I was in that was primarily white, when I got told that I was a good Black person, that I spoke well, that I dressed well, and that, oh, you know, I don't even really think of you as Black, like that could ever be, right? I internalized that. And early on, I was in a position of saying, oh, okay, if other Black people did these things that I do, they could also be, you know, accepted into these majority white spaces and they could make it and they could be successful, right? And so I went from that, which was a total internalization, a total policing of my own community. When I would talk to people about, you know, what they needed to do to succeed, right? A policing of my own community. I went from that to understanding that there were issues, but not feeling like I had the voice to speak on the issues because I was worried about my career, worried about if I would be the angry Black woman, worried about, you know, how I would be perceived, sometimes stunned to the fact that like I just couldn't respond, right? To now I feel I'm still growing. I'm still a work in progress. I give less fucks now, right? And I spend more time trying to think about ways to address things head on, but it's been a journey. And through that journey, I definitely felt like I didn't have a voice in certain spaces. Crystal.
I wanted to ask the other panelists this question right before I say mine, but have you met white folks who say that they've never heard of a Black person who had a problem with anything that they said, or a person of color, right? Those are the people I'm like the most sketched out about, because what that doesn't mean that no one has a problem with you or anything you said. That means no one feels comfortable telling you they have a problem with something you've said. Is anybody on this call perfect? Right, exactly. Like, I'm not perfect. Parker's not perfect. None of these other panelists are perfect. And we teach about this and advise about this all day long. So if you as a white person think you are like some infallible like monolith that has never made one faux pas, you're the problem. Okay. You're the problem, because we're not comfortable saying something to you because we don't trust your reaction. So this is to bring it back to what my little anecdote is the other day I was talking to a young woman who is white, and she said that no one has ever called her out on like anything racist. Even her Black friends say she's like totally fine, even when she checks in on racist jokes. And I was like, If you ask anybody I went to high school with, they would probably tell you that I was fine with them all calling me an Oreo. Which if you don't know what that is Black on the outside and white in the middle. So yeah, if you ask somebody I went to high school with, they would say, yes, the one like dark girl that went to my school, totally fine with all those jokes, totally fine, right? Because I told them I was. On the inside, I was cringing and dying, but I just wanted to be accepted. And I tried to call some stuff out, but honestly, then I was met with, why is everything about race, Crystal? And then I just am kind of like, well, maybe it's not about race. I don't know. And like, I'm just this like young person out there, like, is everything about? Pretty sure. Now I'm like, yo, everything is about race. But back then I wasn't so sure. So yeah, so if you are out there and you think you're above it because no one has ever called you out or no one's ever called you in, please re-examine. Please re-examine and think to yourself, could that be because I'm not allowing space to be called out or to be called in? And how can you make sure that if you make a faux pas, which everyone does, self included, all the time, ask yourself how to make that space for somebody.
I want to add something to that,
Yes,
Crystal.
please.
First of all, I want to add these audible snaps because no lies detected for sure. There was a study I was looking at from a few years ago, and I might be a little off on the percentage, but I'm not far off if I am. It was something like, at least in the US, 91% of white people have no meaningful relationships with Black people. So it might actually be true that some of these white people have never been called out by Black people because they do not know Black people. Someone's corrected me in the chat saying 75%. I want to say, I think the 75% might be people of color as a whole. They're large numbers, whether it be specifically Black people or people of color in general. They're very, very large numbers where white people have, again, no meaningful relationships with Black people. They might be coworkers, they might be classmates, they might be people you walk by and say hello to, but in terms of actually having meaningful conversations and relationship building, that is largely absent, which then of course it makes sense why we experience so many of these weird, painful, abusive interactions, because there's no relationship building to humanize us in the eyes of a lot of white folks that are kind of going around. So yeah, I just wanted to add that in, and I think that's a really big component that, should just be kind of tossed into the conversation too. So yeah, Crystal, thank you for adding that in there.
Yeah, and I think it is really important. I can't see my whole chat from TikTok, but a lot of people are in the chat saying, what does a meaningful relationship look like? And a meaningful relationship to me is where I can fully be myself in the relationship, where I don't feel like I'm holding my breath, where I don't edit myself when I talk to you. And I have white friends that think that we are besties. And there are things that I do not tell them because I know that they would not be able to take it. And basically, like, I've worked on building a relationship with someone, and then something happens where and it's kind of proven like what level of this friendship is going to be, right? Like I would test the waters, you know, they cry over something, or they can't understand even after trying to explain it. And then I know, okay, well, this is going to be like this surface level friendship, right? I saw a really funny TikTok the other day where someone was like, every Black woman has one white woman that is her, I forgot what the term was, but it was basically like your ride or die, and they will go to war for you over certain things, and they will support you and blah, blah, blah. And looking in the comment section, like half the people were like, oh yeah, that's Becky, I got my ride or die, yeah, that's this or that. And then the other half were like, where are y'all finding white people that talk to you? Like, where are you finding white people that you're like really able to invest in that deeply with because they understand you, right? And I think that, like Crystal put in the chat, she couldn't imagine not having a meaningful relationship with at least one white person. There are white people that don't have that, that barely have interactions with people of color, right? That's just not in their daily lives, right? I know white people, like I am often in rooms where I am the only person of color, and I've spoken to white people who have never ever had that experience of being the only white person in a room with people of color, right? They don't, that's not something they experience. So anything else on this topic before we move on to our next question? I feel like we've talked about the first 3 questions, because we've also addressed like it's hard to respond in these situations, right? Oh goodness, I should have got a moderator for my TikTok chat. It's the Wild West in there. Okay. All right. So then the next question is, at what point in your life did you realize that you were aligning with white supremacy? At what point did you realize that your actions were supporting that? And, you know, I think for me, it was a slow awakening, but something that really snapped me kind of out of it. I was speaking with someone, and they were sharing with me something that they had read. And in it, they were talking about the different ways that racism is upheld, and that we have people who are who say no, Black people or people of color are subordinate and don't deserve opportunities, blah blah blah, like outright racist. And then you have people who are like, we're not racist, we're supportive, but what we have to do is provide better opportunities for them to learn how not to be so Black. Like if they could speak it better, if they could dress better, if we could teach them, send them to school and give them the opportunities, then they can be successful in society. And that both were actually racist, because really we should be saying, what is the system that tells us that the way that Black people dress or the way that Black people talk or are not desirable, are subordinate to other ways of speaking, and that until we can address that system, then we're not really affecting the problem of racism. And I remember hearing that and thinking about all the times, you know, that I had this internalized supremacy and had like gone places and had been like, oh, we can't be so loud in here, or, oh, you know, we have to say it a certain way if they're gonna hear it. All the ways that I had talked two other people of color, two other Black people, to tell them how to fit in to society. And I was just upholding a system that wasn't designed to reflect all the beautifulness of Blackness, all the different ways that we come and we present, and that those ways were unique and special, and didn't need to be whitewashed or pulled away from, right? And that's when I realized, wow, I'm supporting this system, even though I thought I knew what was racist and what was not. I am supporting this system. So I would love to hear from other people.
I'll start. I think probably the biggest sort of moment was in college. So my degree program ended up being American Ethnic Studies. So basically learning about all these types of subjects was my college program. And my freshman year, one of our assignments was taking the Harvard implicit bias tests, which there were way fewer of them before, but one of them is like bias towards white people or bias towards Black people. I grew up in a very diverse city, in a very diverse high school. I am an unambiguously Black man. I took this test and my results said moderate preference for white people. And I was horrified, absolutely horrified. Trying to figure out what the hell is going into me that would cause this to come out in my biases. And so then suddenly I just had this kind of season of just reflection. And Parker, I can relate to so much of what you said. Going to I guess a urban city school, but then one that had a very kind of prominent academic program there. And so kind of being in the mix of being the only Black kid in all of my classes in a very diverse high school. And I was an athlete where we're almost all Black people on the basketball team, and, a lot on the football team too. And so definitely internalizing a lot of these ideas of, hey, the way that I speak, yeah, this is how you're supposed to speak. And, internalizing these messages, I got the same types of messages in terms of, oh, you're so articulate. And unlike these other Black kids, like you're doing so well. And me not seeing those as the racist insult that they were, just, yeah, you're right. Yeah. And kind of believing these sorts of things, and communicating in these different ways. And definitely language, like I love how you talked about language, and like AAVE versus other ways of speaking, and rank ordering those in my brain. Code switch game, way too good. Way too good. In terms of being able to change my language to make white people feel comfortable. And that really does something to us psychologically to do that, and feeling like, man, who am I really? And is it this, is it that? Does it need to be doing this? These ways that I definitely would sort of perform Blackness because of all these mixed signals that I got in terms of what it was. And so, yeah, that was a really big thing for me. And then seeing how that translates intersectionally too, and ideas that I would learn specifically about Black women and about beauty standards and culture standards and what is desirable in women. And then, there's like we could really tangent off in terms of how religious ideologies mixes into that as well. And then going into ideas about LGBTQIA+ people, and then how that all comes together with Blackness as well. So yeah, that was a really big sort of initial jolt for me to realize that, oh, dang, I got a lot of work that I need to do, especially if I want to dismantle this stuff as part of my life calling.
Thank you so much, Tony. That's so powerful. Chris?
Yeah, I think my moment came in my mid-20s. I was working at an environmental education facility, and I heard someone use me as a beard and an excuse for their bad behavior to another marginalized person. So it made me realize and like take stock of like all the ways that I could have signaled to them that like we were more than colleagues, we were buddies, and that I approved of their behavior. And like it just like made me realize that I had been kind of performing my races and my sexuality and my gender identity in a way that was more comfortable for them to accept, but it also kind of made a caricature of my people. And so like by making jokes about myself and about my cultures, like one of them, like I'll just give one example, like I like when we talk about race, they'd be like, oh yeah, I'm white, whatever. And I would say I was salmon, which is a mix of white, yellow, and red, which like I knew was like racial taxonomy and like racist as hell and made by eugenicists, but like I thought like I don't know, I thought that it helped my proximity. Like I'm already white passing, so it helped my proximity, it helped me be less threatening in a way if I would make fun of myself in this way and like give permission for people to make fun of me in this way. But it didn't like click in my head that then they would use that against other people in my community. And so like even if I was at the point where I could accept this as like the price of my entrance, I guess, in proximity to whiteness and in my job, like just getting along, like it wasn't something that other people agreed to pay, but they were paying it because I was the mixed friend who said it was okay. So I think that was my first awakening that like not only was I steeped in white supremacy that needed to be dismantled, I had actively participated and it hurt people within the BIPOC communities, within the queer community, within the trans community, because I was giving people permission to make fun of us.
Oh, goodness. That hit me like, oh, so deep and on another level, because I think that's what happens, right? When you say that it's okay, when you let the behavior pass, they use that and they say, okay, this person of color said that it's okay, right? And I mean, I should know that by now. I see it all the time in my comments, section where they're like, oh, this Black friend that I have said that it's okay to do things. And I think it's important for us to really hold that, because we are not a monolith as in our different cultures, and we should not be giving people carte blanche permission to do things, that are going to impact other people, right? Other people of color. So powerful. I would love to hear from other folks on this, if anyone.
Yeah. At what point in your life did you realize you were aligning with white supremacy? I knew from a very young age because I was supposed to. Coming from a single parent household where my mother was illegal, my form of survival was to be as white as possible, even though it wouldn't show on my skin. I would never get rid of the melanin on my skin. But if I spoke English without a Spanish accent, if I made all white friends, if I knew how to navigate the system, then I would be okay if my mother was taken away, deported, right? It was deeply ingrained to me that whiteness meant safety. And so I had to abandon a lot of my culture because it meant safety for me and my sister. So I knew ever since I could read or write that I had to be the best white person that I could be in order to stay in this country, in order to assimilate as much as possible. So that way I could carry on this American dream that was placed on me from both sides of my family, So I knew at a very, very young age that I needed to align with white supremacy in order to survive. And that's a weird place to be, right? Like I didn't realize it until I was more educated at the time. Now in my adult years, that's exactly what it was. was survival. And when you know better, you do better, right? But even when I would go to the US consulate with my mother, I would put on my white person voice at 15 years old, and talk down to the people in front of me that were my people, that were Guatemaltecos and Mexicanos. I would talk down to them because I spoke English without an accent, because I was taught that way. Because of my survival, I was a good brown person. I was a good white brown person. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Rosie. And we do so much for survival, right? As folks of color, to try and fit in and to try and go undetected, unmolested, unharassed, right? Crystal.
Yeah, Rosie, before I go into mine, I want to say, yes, that's something we were talking about before the call, is the reasons why it might be intentional. And I think we're going to come back to that in a little bit, but thank you for sharing that, because that is a huge thing. Like, sometimes it's a protective thing, even for grownups. It could be a safety measure. So thank you for sharing that, that story and that vulnerability. The other thing I wanted to say before my story was that I kind of equate letting things pass as like taking work for free as like a DEI consultant, right? So if a company that I like and admire is like, hey, can you do this for free? And I'm like, wow, I would love to. It's not just failing me, it's failing the woman of color behind me, who then is set up for, well, the last person did it for free or did it for $100 for 3 days of labor. Why can't you? And so to me, letting these comments pass is kind of a similar thing, where it's not just about us in this moment. When we have the ability to, not for a safety reason, when we have the ability and the knowledge to say something and speak out, it's not just for us, it's for the next person. So we don't get a pileup of people being like, well, I've told this joke to like 50 people of color and not one of them said anything about it. So it is funny. How many of you all on the panel have heard that before, right? Like, oh, it's fine when I say the N-word in a song or a joke, where that's the point, right? Because I said this to like other Black people and they thought it was funny. I'm like, great, I don't. But it puts all that pressure on me to stand up even more in that moment because of the weight of the people before me who didn't. So the anecdote I want to give is more about when I realized my levels of internalized oppression, which I teach diversity, equity, and inclusion. I do consulting and I speak on these things. And there's a study I like to show about how teachers, there was like a study with teachers where they were presented with the same paper, basically the same quality writing. And one paper had a Black sounding name on it and one paper had like a white sounding name on it. And despite being exactly the same level, they would give the Black sounding name a lower grade. Now, this study observed that this would change if they had to defend that grade to other people. Right. So if then they have to say like, oh, I gave Tony this low grade because of this in front of other people, they would be like, but maybe a B plus. And they would kind of make it a little bit higher, but still not quite as high as the white sounding names. So I'm like talking about these studies about like bias in education and things like that, and how that sets you up for a system of being further behind than you really could be. And I've taught this like 3 or 4 times. And then it dawned on me in the middle of a training. I'm like telling this exact thing for like the 4th time in a row. And it dawned on me how subject to this I was. So in middle school, I was called upon by my English teacher who wanted me to read a paper out loud because it was so good. So I read this paper out loud and they were like, listen to her voice. It's so amazing. Like, this is great. Here's all the qualities. I got a B on that paper, right? So I'm standing up in front of the class talking about how like reading my paper as the example, and I got a B. So I always called myself a bad writer. I was like, I'm not very good at writing. And people would say, why? And I say, because I didn't get good grades. But on the other hand, like I'll write something and Parker, look at Parker's face. I'll whip something out in like 30 seconds. I'll write like 2 pages and Parker's
You're an
like,
amazing writer. You're an amazing writer.
even our copywriters who are in the audience today, I'm really surprised whenever they compliment a piece of writing that I've done. I'm like, I'm really not a good writer. So it was in the middle of training about this like grade deflation where I was like, oh my God, like I just bought into the fact that I am not a good writer based on these grades. Even though I literally teach about this stuff, I still assumed the grade I got was a grade I deserved. And in that, I literally like stopped. I don't know if anybody was in that training where I like stopped and was like, oh my gosh, I need a moment. But it never occurred to me growing up that I was not getting the grades I deserved to have gotten, and that it's some of the subjectivity of grading could have been due to racial bias. And that was a moment not that long ago where I just was like, what else have I internalized this hard, where it's so surprising when it comes out? What else am I not aware of internalizing? And how am I passing that on? If I believe that about myself, who am I passing that on to without realizing it? How surprised would I be if I found out I was passing that on to other kids that I taught or mentored or hang out with, you know? How surprised would I be if I knew? And yeah, that's where I'm gonna leave that.
Thank you so much, Crystal. And yeah, it's true. There are things that have surprised me over the years. And as I have learned, I think we talk about our next question and maybe put them together, what empowered us to take steps towards unsubscribing from white supremacy, and what are beliefs or practices that we had to unlearn as we did this work, right? I think that I had to really think about the ways that not only was I internalizing white supremacy about myself, but also the ways that I internalized white supremacy about other groups, other people, right? Other group, people of color is what I mean. And I wrote a blog post, maybe we can get it shared in the chat again. I wrote a blog post that I dropped today, and it was about, thank you, Danny. It was about the different ways that I have unknowingly fed into white supremacy delusions and waking up from that. In that blog post, I shared this picture, right? This is me. I blurred out everybody else's faces, but this is me at my very first camp job. My very first introduction into the outdoors was working at a Native American themed summer camp. And at that summer camp, it was like every possible stereotype and trope about Native Americans. They had the kids dressed up. You could see the counselors, we dressed up. The men wore headdresses, the women wore feathers. The kids competed in different tribal lands. They competed to win a tribal shield that was a chest of just like pins. And I wanted this job. I wanted to be involved in it. I was in the South and didn't have a real understanding about the issues that our Indigenous brothers and sisters face. And it took me a lot of unraveling and unlearning to realize that, wow, participated in this camp. No, I didn't want to get fired. Yes, I wanted the job. At the time, you know, it also was woven in with all of those camp memories that people, I think they use that as a reason for continuing with the racism, right? And I had to have an understanding that, wow, this was super messed up. This is something that's in my past that I am not proud of. And I, as a Black person, right, was navigating all of the things that I had to navigate of being in a primarily white space, but also, you know, I was not educated about the things that other communities were facing and participated in that white supremacy delusion. And so, you know, having a realization that I, you know, have to do my own education as well. Like I'm out here teaching white folks and having these conversations about the things that white folks need to do to bring down white supremacy as the creators of that, but also having an understanding that I can't only you know, advocate and fight for my fight, right, as a Black woman, but I also want to and need to be advocating for these issues that are affecting other communities of color, because it's when we all come together and link that voice together that we can make really powerful change. And so I worked to empower myself to step away from that. I had to do a lot of work. I had to do research. I had to read the books, the same books that I tell other people to read, right? I had to think about the issues and realize that the issues, as I am fighting for my own rights and my own issues, that I also needed to understand the issues of other groups, because white supremacy will use us against one another. White supremacy will have us infighting between people of color so that it can stand as it is, right? And so that, to me, there is power in that, that to link up with my fellow brothers and sisters of color, right, in this, that I needed to have a deep understanding of how white supremacy affected them as much as it affects me, and as much as I understand how it affects me as a Black woman. So, like to open it up to other folks. Or maybe I just dropped the mic. Did I just drop the mic? No one got nothing to say? Crystal's like, after you showed the picture.
I just dropped my phone and think it broke, so I was a little distracted.
No problem, we keeping it real.
One of the things that you brought up, though, Parker, is this idea of rocking the boat. Everybody heard, like, don't rock the boat, you know, come on, like, be a team player. One of the things, I think it was Taisha Adams that said, I can swim. Right. And since that day, yes. I was like, oh, girl, that is awesome. So one of the things that made, when she said that to me, made me think was, if all of these people took the same energy they spent telling me to stop rocking the boat because they wanted to protect me, and spent that same exact time and energy and effort protecting me when I rocked the boat and threw me some life preservers, like, this is the whole point. Like, so, you know, from some of the stories we've heard, if you think you're going to be the only one raising your hand saying, I've got a problem with this, which I've been doing since kindergarten, it's really scary, right? And then you could be fired, you could be made fun of, you could be demoted, I don't know, like, just not given the next promotion because you're like this problem person, right? Which is why it's so important for white folks to be like, yes, and, right? Or like, hold up, let's listen to Parker. Hold on, let's like listen to Chris here, you know, like maybe somebody else should take notes. By the way, fun fact, Chris, I never volunteer to take notes anymore. I wait until somebody else volunteers, and usually I make a suggestion that is the person with the most privilege in the room or Zoom room to take notes. And usually the white dudes are like, I'm sorry, what? Like, you should see people's faces in a room when you say, I nominate the person with the most privilege to take notes. Sometimes that's me. That's been me before, but it's not usually me. And people like really stop and think about that. But yeah, if you take that same energy from people who are like, don't rock the boat, and you turn that into, let me help you rock the boat, we can swim, that's a completely different conversation.
I love that. I'm sure it was Taisha that said something so wise. She's like one of the wisest people that I know. Okay. So we have, you know what, how about we, I would say if there's anything else that people want to add to this, I want to kind of open the floor. And I also want, if people have questions, you can put it in the chat, right? If people have questions, and we will, I'll just preface it by saying we're going to answer questions that we feel comfortable answering. And I will also say that we are looking to center other people of color in this space. And so, you know, are looking for comments or questions coming from other people of color engaged in this space. So we'll do that. We can ask put questions in the chat, and I will ask if our panelists have any final thoughts or things they want to add to this conversation before we dive into those questions.
Go ahead, Chris.
We all unclicked at the same time. I think that for me, like going off what Crystal said, there was this moment where I decided that the pain of anything that I would experience as a disruptor would be less than the ongoing and continuous pain of just putting up with what I was putting up with. Like between the racism, the homophobia, and the transphobia, it came to this point where I was at what my therapist called an allostatic load. I can't remember what it was called, but where I was having like physical ailments from the stress that I was experiencing at work. And so like anything that I can do to disrupt and make things better is better for me. And not only that, it'll be better for the next person who comes. Because even though I'm a token right now, I don't want to be the token forever. And I hope that there will be people after me and that we can transform the organization to be something better. So yeah, I think like before I didn't have that opportunity because I wasn't financially secure and I had been fired a couple of times for disrupting. But, you know, when you get to that point where you're safe-ish, I think that you have to take stock and realize dealing with this for the rest of my life is going to be horrible. So like taking whatever knocks happen right now will either tell me I need to leave or, you know, they'll be temporary. So I think that that was big for me. And then also the part of the unlearning process was also not wanting to be the token anymore for me. Like, because for me, like there was this pride I almost had in being the token and being the only one. And I realized how shit that was. Like, not only is it like gatekeeping other people from opportunities that could be useful for them, it's also, it doesn't serve anyone. Like, the only thing it serves is my ego and thinking that I'm the special one, but I'm not the special one, I'm the token, and that's not special.
Thank you, Chris. Other folks?
See us all looking at each other. I'll go first or next, I suppose. Chris, thank you for sharing that too. I think just kind of even leading into that, you know, what do we do? What are the processes? How do we kind of get out of this stuff? And the way that I look at it, there's so much of social programming that we endure that gives us these ideas. And it's like the air that we breathe, this constant bombardment of messages about ourselves and our identities and what those things mean in the society that we live in. And it sucks and it's bullshit that this is the case, but it requires us to just do so much intentional inner work to reprogram those beliefs that we have. So for me, like I had to be very intentional in changing, what do I like expose myself to? What kind of shows am I watching? What kind of movies am I watching? What kind of news sources am I listening to? And I'm grateful that we're in the internet era where I can go to news sources beyond what's on TV, because those are never complimentary or humanizing of Black people. For example, speaking from my experience, what kind of music, what does my community look like? Oh, has that been such a huge thing, is to have spaces of Black community, or spaces where there's, Black, Indigenous, people of color community, but where we don't have to engage with or do all of the theatrics to appease whiteness. And I've had to create those spaces many times throughout the years because it just hasn't existed. So it's like, damn it, we need this, I'm gonna create it. And then every time when I've created these spaces, people are like, yes, 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 yes. And it's amazing and it's healing and all those sorts of different things. And sometimes it's just knowing that you are truly not losing your mind, knowing that it's not just in your head, knowing that, no, we all are experiencing the same thing. Being in spaces where I am listening to people who communicate in all sorts of different ways, people who cuss, people who, use all the slang or whatever. And then being able to realize that that is not due to lack of education or knowledge, that is actually beautiful, creative, cultural expression that needs to be honored as such in the full brilliance of what it is. And just all these spaces of like, I need to change what is coming into me so I can reprogram and re-understand who I am and what that looks like in society and be able to see my full intelligence, my abilities. Sometimes it's taking actions even when I don't fully believe them all the way. Like I applied for a director position a few years ago, and I had so much inner conflict about this director position. So I'm like, I don't have an advanced degree. I haven't been a director before. I was an assistant director, but it really wasn't that substantive. I'm like, no, Tony, you've read the job description. You do all of that stuff super well. You've been doing it for years. Apply for the damn position. And I got the position. And it was like a doubling of my salary for this position from the previous one before. So just so much of this work that we have to do, but is it just incredible what gets unlocked when we choose to go down that path, even though it's hella hard, it's difficult, it's painful to realize all these different things, but then just the beauty that comes from being willing to go through that process.
Thank you so much, Tony. And I think we did have a question come up in TikTok, but I think that you and other folks were answering it. Like, what are some of the things that we do to mitigate the white supremacist delusion, right? And excuse me, I love that what you just said. And I think about, the ways, like I mentioned earlier, we have to educate ourselves just like we expect other people to educate themselves, right? We have to have an understanding, and that's where that unprogramming comes from. Like everyone, there is, I think, a conversation around whether or not people of color can be racist, right? That is a conversation that I hear people ask a lot, and then they're like, what is this? What is that? Racism is attached to power, right? Having power, within a system. And when we think about the system that we have right now, people of color don't have power within that system. Like they weren't the one that, if we follow the bias oppression ladder that I talked about at the beginning, they weren't the ones that created the white supremacy bias, right, that got laddered up into our systems and the way that we interact. But even though we cannot, we don't have power in this situation, we can uphold the system, right? We can ignore the system. We can say that there is no system because we don't have an understanding of the real effect of the system. So it's really important that people of color educate ourselves, just like we are asking white folks to educate themselves. We have to be aware of the ways that we have been programmed in this system, just as much as white people have been programmed in this system. And if we can all just wake up from the matrix, right? If we can all just take the, I don't know which pill it is, but take the blue or the red pill, whichever one gets us out of this delusion. I think if the red pill, take the red pill. I think it would be amazing, because that is how we can then really start to work together to break down the system. We can create that resistance. Other questions? And also I would invite, we have about 14 minutes, though, we're not gonna pull it out if we've run out of things to say, but I would invite any other questions, or if there are folks of color who have been listening in here on the Zoom, thank you for joining us. If anyone wants to speak to their own experience, we can have that as well. Crystal.
So yeah, I just wanted to refresh the fact that when we talk about white supremacy, we're not just talking about people who use the N-word and burn tiki torches and crosses, right? We're talking about white as the default. White supremacy is often everyone's like, I'm not a white supremacist. Are you kidding? That's Nazis. And it's no, supremacy, the word in its basic form, is what we are talking about here. White as the default. And so I'm going to give you a little secret. Okay. So I'm on dating apps, and after taking the Harvard, sorry, I was just so nervous saying that. I'm like, the complicit bias, the explicit bias, implicit bias. Can you put the Harvard implicit bias link into the chat for everyone so that people can see what we're talking about? So the Harvard implicit bias test also showed that I had a preference for whiteness, right? White supremacy. So now when I'm on dating apps, I actually slow down on people of color no matter what, and intentionally spend more time so I don't inadvertently make the algorithm as aware of my own apparent bias as Harvard is. So I will literally slow down on people of color and just be like, oh, that's a no for that person anyway, but I'm gonna sit a minute and swipe left, just in case my biases play into how the timed algorithms work, right? And so that's just one thing that it sucks to admit that you have these things. It does not feel good. After I took that test, even though I teach about this stuff, it did not feel like something amazing. I wasn't like, wow, what a wonderful world. I was like, this sucks. And you have to be able to sit with that and then think what am I gonna do? And for me, that answer was swipe slower on people of color. But for you, it might be something else. But that's also something, shameless plug, Parker and I work on the Inclusive Guide, is acknowledging that no one is perfect. No business is perfect. I don't walk into every business being like, it's gonna be perfect. I expect perfection. that, like, it's not a realistic standard, but what are you going to do about it now that you know? What are you going to do about it if you have the examples? What are you going to do about it now that you have the data? And there's like tons of resources out there, like Tony's like right here, like Google is like right behind this browser that you're looking at right now. There's books, there's so many things you can do, but the first step is just sitting there and being uncomfortable. It sucks. And it's super worth it. It is so worth it. It's such an interesting journey. It's such an interesting ride to be in that place where you're like, yeah, I can learn something today. And to be able to hear it, it's like, it's the best thing. It's so liberating to not know it all. I used to think I knew it all. No, it's so liberating to admit you don't.
You don't know it all, Crystal.
No.
We did get another question from TikTok, but what I would ask is if our 3 panelists who are not on Inclusive Guide could drop their Cash App or Venmo handles into the chat. And then if we could have Kit also share that over on TikTok. I think that it's important to, if you have gotten something from today and our conversation, if you could please send a little compensation their way. I think that'd be amazing.
And your website info where people can look up more about you or the work you do or something you care about greatly.
Yes, and this is great. I wish, goodness, and I wish I could cut and paste, but I'm like, Kit can do it. Thank you, Kit. Kit can do all things. They are amazing. All right, so we're gonna drop that in, and we'll also drop these links into the comments of the Facebook live stream so that if anyone watches it from here on out, we've got that. Okay, so the other question, and we have just about 9 minutes that someone had, is someone wanted to hear more about how we can break away from marginalized people being pitted against one another, right? How we, and we see it like this infighting. And I remember, the first time I had this experience, I grew up, and one of my close friends when I was younger was an Asian woman. She was a girl or teen at that time, but it seemed so cool and so natural for us to be friends. And it wasn't until later that I was exposed to and learned about this, like, oh, we're supposed to be enemies, Asian and Black folks, like, and we've got this whole thing where a lot of people in the API community have been held up as this model minority standard, and Black people are on the far end. We ain't model nothing. Like, ain't nobody want to be us. And we have this, they don't want to be us, but they want to be us. Then we have this thing where we are pitted against one another, right? Oh, here is a minority that statistically is doing well and can do this and that. And if you can't do that, then it is your own failing because other people of color can, right? Or when we have issues where, we had Black Lives Matter, and then we had like this slew with the coronavirus of people attacking the Asian community. And then I had people in my own community and heard from Black people, oh, well, we're not gonna worry about that. And oh, it's their turn to feel like we feel. And all of these like awful racist things that people were saying, because once again, it upholds white supremacy if we are fighting against one another. It upholds white supremacy if we're like, oh, but those folks, they're not real people of color, or they're this or that, right? And we have to have that conversation. I'd love to hear anything from anyone else.
Yeah, I think that this harkens back. I am first generation here in America, but when all of the hate was happening against the Asian American community here with the rise of the coronavirus, I had to explain to my mother and my great aunt why it was happening. And to me, the work means taking that on to explain it to your own community, right? Understanding that we're not a monolith, understanding that and being able to convey why we need to stand with one another. And that's hard to recognize, right? Because in my community, in the Latino community, Afro-Latinidad, you hold multiple identities, right? But that's not necessarily acceptable. And same with coming from Guatemala and being half Mayan, you kind of shun the indigenous side of yourself. So there's a lot of work that we need to do in our own respective communities because white supremacy is so ingrained in each of us to uphold that. So my work, I guess, is educating my community, my own family, and understanding that we're coming from a place that we can be wrong and that we need to ask for help to understand too.
Yeah. And I'm so glad you said that, Rosie, because it really is about how do we speak to our communities. And I will say, so I did a TikTok about this earlier. I had a white person in the comments who said, I will sometimes have white people use other people of color to say that this thing is okay, or I will have people of color that, will defend something that's racist. And, how do I talk to them, or what do I say? And I'm going to say, don't. Right? I'm going to say, let us collect our community. And we need white folks to collect their community. And because of the racial dynamics, right, we can talk about our experiences to white people, but when it comes to white people trying to correct people of color, and we've seen it, if you've been on TikTok, I know y'all seen it, right? It brings around a racial connotation that you can't get rid of, right? And so we need to call it to the attention of someone that can do the work and step back. And we need to put in the work as people of color to collect ourselves. And we try and do it in private, right? Because we don't want to add to that bigger conversation, but we need to be doing it. So.
Deneuve had a comment. Deneuve, come back. Deneuve actually is on our web team and had a experience to share.
Hi, everyone.
Yes.
I was going to say my daughter is in here and she was going to mess all the communication up. But yes, as give me 1 second. Give me 1 second, please. But as I always like to speak on certain things as an immigrant. It's very difficult for us as well because we're in a way far removed, but not so far removed from it all. And we also have those inner biases against ourselves and other people who look like us. For instance, just like Parker growing up, I had a lot of Jamaican friends. And it wasn't until I was in college, I met individuals that asked me if I had any Jamaican friends. And I'm like, yeah, growing up, I had, plenty of Jamaican friends. And they were asking about how is that possible? Because Jamaicans are supposed to hate Haitians and Haitians hate Jamaicans. And it's just all this this negativity that's out there that we have to work through and not teach our kids through ourselves.
Yes.
That's basically all I wanted to say.
Thank you so much for saying that, because it's so true. And we have to have those conversations, right? And so I'm really thankful that we've been able to have this conversation here, and thankful for all of you coming and lending your voice to this. I just want to encourage folks that have listened in on this, right? If you are a person of color that is dealing with this, right? Find community. That's something that's really built me up, being able to surround myself with community and talk about these things, to wake up from these delusions, to read the literature of civil rights leaders, of activists, to think about our other people of color who maybe are outside your own identity group, but the way that we can support each other and come together. I think these are such important conversations to have, and we need to speak to ourselves as well as speak to dominant identities, right? We all have to come together under this. So I thank everyone for being here today. Crystal, is there anything that I am forgetting?
I just want to say thank you everyone for coming. And last words, instead of asking people of color, look it up first. Someone has said it before and someone has said it better than me. If you do ask people of color, compensate them and compensate them well. Other than that, Google it.
Google is free. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. I want to thank you for people who were listening in on the live stream on TikTok. We're going to say goodbye to you all now, especially since my phone is losing battery. And we're going to thank folks that came into the room. Please, you can share the recording if you would like to share with other people. But thank you so much for coming and listening to us and having this space. And you all have, I'm going to show so I can see who's in the room. You all have a wonderful evening. Let's see.
How do